Well, welcome everybody to a session on today's popular topic, immigration. We are rolling out and discussing today our most recent paper on immigration policy solutions to shortages in critical sectors of the U.S. economy. And we're very lucky to have two of the primary authors here with us. Thibault Denamiel is a research fellow here at the Scholl Chair and Economics Program at CSIS. And it's a particular pleasure to also have with us, flying in from Texas, Jason Schenker, who is a non-resident fellow with the Economics Department and Scholl Chair, but is also, probably more important, president of Prestige Economics and chairman of the Futurist Institute, and has a long record of brilliant economic forecasting. And so we're delighted that he was able to be a part of this process. We're going to be talking about immigration today, and we're not going to be talking about STEM, which is what people like to talk about when it comes to immigration. PhD engineers and scientists. That's a very important piece of the puzzle, but I think what we're going to talk about today is overall the shortage of workers in all different categories of American employment. And declining fertility, and what is going to be a long-term problem and not just an immediate problem. If you look at the problem historically, this is not a new issue. It's been a fraud issue for approaching 200 years. If you think back, well, nobody can think back this far, but if you remember or read about the 1850s and 60s and the Irish, and then the latter half of the 19th century with immigrants from Eastern Europe and from Italy, 1880s and 90s, the Chinese on the Pacific coast. Now most of our immigration comes from Latin America, various countries, not just Mexico. But so the source changes and the immigration point changes. It used to be New York and East Coast ports, or San Francisco and West Coast ports. Now it's mostly the southern border, but the issue remains the same. And the issue really is once you're here, there's a lot of people that want to shut the door so nobody else can come in. It's ironic, since most of us came from somewhere else, either directly or through our ancestors. In my case, on my two sides came from Germany and from England via Canada. So I'm a first-generation American, and many of us are first or second generation Americans or new arrivals. And they really have been the core of the American workforce for a very long time, and they've enabled the United States to grow economically spectacularly over 150 years. And we want to make sure that that record continues, but doing that, I think, is going to require some revisions in our immigration policy, which we'll be talking about at the end of this program. We didn't set out to spend a lot of time on the details of immigration law. And we're not going to do that now. We're going to talk about the problem and then a little bit about the solution. But the reality is that we haven't reformed our immigration law since 1986. So we have a long way, it's been a long time, a lot of changes in that period. And it's something that the Congress has attempted to deal with for multiple times in the last 2 decades, unsuccessfully. And we all are hoping in the next year or two that Congress will be able to finally reach agreement on an approach that will address the problems, some of which we'll be talking about. So with that, having introduced the speakers, let me turn it over to Jason and to Thibault. Those of you online will note, I hope, that you can click on a little place somewhere on the title page of this to ask questions. We are, in theory, technologically prepared to accept your questions. So go ahead and do that, and I'll remind you when we get to the time of having questions. So be sure to log in and do that if you want to ask us a question. So I'm going to turn first to Jason and then Thibault, who are going to present our findings, and then we'll have a discussion about it. So Jason, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Bill. It's great to be here with you today. And this is a really important topic. I know for a lot of the corporations that I talk to in industry groups I speak to throughout the year, the watchwords workforce development have been constant throughout the year. The tight labor market in the wake of COVID, where we had at one point 12.2 million open jobs as a peak in March of 2022, really highlighted how tight the labor market was, and the shortages that we had then in some sectors we still see today. So I want to highlight some of the critical data as we think about the economic operating environment in which we find ourselves. First of all is the US fertility rate, which has been falling for decades. And this is a really big problem because if we don't have a national replacement rate above 2%, then it's very difficult for the domestic population to maintain itself. The only way then for the population to grow is through immigration. Obviously, if we want to have a growing economy, there are three key ingredients to GDP growth. It's capital, it's labor, it's technology. And of course, having labor, having people, a critical element of that. The fertility rates, though, aren't just falling in the United States, they're falling everywhere. I remember a decade ago now plus reading the book, What to Expect When No One's Expecting, which focused on falling fertility rates all over the world. And we see that now in a very pronounced way. The United States, not alone in this, we don't have the lowest of the fertility rates among the most advanced economies, but we do have a very low one, especially historically. As we look at our own demographics, not only do we have a falling fertility rate, we also have an aging population. This graphic shows the difference between just 2010 and 2019. The 2010, the unshaded boxes, and in 2019, you can see there's fewer younger people and more older people, and I think if we were to update this to today, we'd see even more of that shift. In fact, in a recent Pew Research survey, something around 47% of respondents under 50 said they don't expect to have children. So this is a pretty big number if we think about what does our future population growth look like as we see fewer people having children. How do we get to population growth, which is going to be really important to sustain older members in society who also aren't necessarily going to be participating in the labor force. The labor market is also very tight, although the unemployment rate has gone up in the last year or so. It's still very low. As we sit here at 4.2%, it's a very low unemployment rate, and the only reason it's gone up in the last 2 years isn't because payrolls have fallen. In fact, payrolls have been positive every single month for the last 24 months, but the unemployment rate has still gone up. It's gone up because there are more people looking for work than jobs being created. That still means, though, there are net new payrolls. As we sit here, there is a record high level of payrolls. Around 159.3 million people are on payrolls in the United States. Despite that and the rise in the unemployment rate, the number of job openings is really, really high. So even though the unemployment rate's gone up, we have record payrolls. We also have very high job openings. The most recent data, over 7.7 million open jobs as we sit here. Now that's lower than the 12.2 million record set in March of 2022 in the wake of COVID when we saw what people called the Great Resignation. But look at where we were before COVID. This would be the all-time record high prior to 2020. So we have lots and lots of open jobs across a number of critical sectors where immigrants have historically played and currently play disproportionately large roles and that are physically demanding in-person roles. Moreover, even though the unemployment rate's gone up, we have record payrolls, we have lots of open jobs, we have very few people actively collecting unemployment. The continuing jobless claims, the most recent data, just a little above 1.9 million. This is very low historically. You can see going back over time, these are very, very low levels. Moreover, with a record labor or near record labor force level of 168.3 million, 1.9 million people collecting unemployment is only 1.1% of the labor force. So while the unemployment rate has gone up, and that is a statistic tied to a household survey, if we look at the number of people actually collecting unemployment, it's very, very low. It's, again, 1.1% of the labor force is actively collecting unemployment right now. One of the sectors where immigration is absolutely critical and immigrants play a very large role and that has lots of job openings is construction. Right now, the latest data shows there's almost 250,000 open jobs in construction. Interest rates have begun to go down. They've only gone down a little bit, but as most are expecting the Fed to continue to cut rates, including today, as we see.
You'll see about that, yes.
We'll see if it happens, but it is widely anticipated. If you look at the CME Fed Watch tool, the high probability of rate cuts over the next couple of years. As interest rates go down, you typically see home prices go up. Well, if home prices go up, you're going to see more construction demand, more demand for people to work in construction, right? Home prices go up, you're going to see a lot more folks. Mortgage rates go down, you see more demand there, but home prices could end up going up even more significantly if we end up with not enough people in construction. Again, we have almost 250,000 open jobs right now in construction, a physically demanding in-person role, and as interest rates go down, mortgage rates go down, demand for construction workers also going to go up. This is that total payroll number I mentioned earlier. As we sit here, around 159.3 million, a record number of people on payrolls. And thinking about housing, one of the reasons so important is that if you look at owner's equivalent rent, part of the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, it's about a quarter of total CPI and a third of core CPI. In fact, housing costs are one of the critical things supporting inflation, why it's elevated as we sit here. Having more people in construction, having more construction out there, that's something that could help alleviate some of the price pressures on housing. As we look at U.S. rental vacancies, where we are right now, you'd have to go back to find a lower rate of rental vacancies right now. You'd have to go back to 1985 to find something lower than where we are right now, other than in the immediate post-COVID period. So we've got a very tight level of rental vacancies. We have falling interest rates, which is probably going to allow mortgage rates to fall and increase housing demand at a time when we have not enough people working in construction. But that's not the only sector where we see a real problem for physically demanding in-person labor shortages. Healthcare is another area. Right now, if we look at open healthcare and social assistance jobs, this is JOLTS data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Right now, there's over 1.3 million open healthcare and social assistance jobs. Physically demanding in-person roles. Again, you look back where we were prior to COVID, we're at or near record levels right now. This is part of the reason that medical CPI, if we compare regular inflation, like total consumer price index inflation, to medical, which is the light blue line here, medical CPI has greatly outpaced what we see in total costs consumers experience. And as the labor force ages, we saw that population pyramid looking more and more like a silo. As it becomes more top heavy and we have baby boomers retire in greater numbers, and the population age generally, you're going to see greater needs for medical workers, greater medical cost inflation risk. Making sure we can fill some of those open 1.3 million plus jobs in healthcare and social services is going to be really important for containing that part of inflation as well. And then there's another sector where we see significant issues, and that's in transportation, warehousing, utilities. Right now, there's almost 300,000 open jobs in this sector, and of course we often hear about this. There's not enough folks working in trucking and transport, and this part of the economy is really, really important. It's the lifeblood of the economy, supply chain. These areas are really, really important, become more critical, especially with e-commerce. Record e-commerce dollars recorded in the most recent quarter, almost a record level of e-commerce as a percent of all retail. The most recent data we have showed 16.2% of all retail sales came from predominantly e-commerce retail is the most recent quarter. That's the data for Q3. We'll see what Q4 holds. We're very close to the all-time record high, which was 16.4% set in Q2 of 2020, right in the immediate COVID period. So right now we're at 16.2% of all commerce that's e-commerce. More demand for folks in transport, in warehousing, in utilities, in those supply chain and transportation logistics jobs. And then I want to turn it over to Thibault to discuss how some of the visas we've written about in the report and how that can help to play to to alleviate some of these pressures, solve some of these labor issues, and hopefully mitigate some of those inflationary risks that could threaten the economy. Please, Thibault.
Sure, and I just wanted to highlight another sector that we've looked at in the study, which is food production, right? We're also seeing critical labor shortages in that area of the U.S. economy, and that has tremendous implications for every U.S. household, because we're talking about U.S. grocery prices hiking up. Labor shortages are a key part of those considerations. And at the heart of food production is obviously agriculture. So the first type of visa we wanted to look at rather was the H-2A visa, which is specifically geared towards temporary agricultural workers. And there we had a few policy recommendations when it came to sort of fixing the system so we could get the heart of labor shortage issues in food production, right? And the first one is making compliance costs a little more costly for farm owners, right? There's about 70% of farmers supposedly that are non-compliant with H-2A, whether it's illegally employing immigrants and not processing the proper paperwork. We could increase these non-compliance costs and then get to another issue with CSIS, which is the fact that it just doesn't have the staffing and the resources needed to actually process all of the applications. That's not just for H-2A, that's a problem that's widespread in CSIS. That's also been a huge issue for H-1B visas, which are part of our considerations there. So that's our first policy recommendation, is increase non-compliance costs for farmers and then use those revenues to enhance CSIS processes that are lagging behind, are increasingly worrisome, right? The second issue that we've been looking at was easing restrictions and renewal processes on all of these temporary visas, H-2A and H-2B in particular, that are relevant to, again, agricultural, but also healthcare and construction. Right now, H-2A and H-2B visa grantees can stay from 3 months to 10 months in the United States. And maybe that can be extended to 3 years, although that's a rare occasion. But usually what they have to do after that 3 to 10 month period is go back to their country of origin, stay there continuously for 3 months until they can apply for another H-2A to H-2B. That's why we call these seasonal visas. The issue with that system is that it adds an enormous amount of volatility to both hiring practices, so employers, including farmers, don't have nearly as much visibility as they should for the labor market. And it also makes it much less attractive for talented workers in all of these sectors to actually come to the United States. You can imagine working for 10 months, having to come back to your country for 3 months, on and on in that cycle. You're probably missing out on a lot of workers that could be coming if they weren't facing those barriers. And the last visa we looked at was H-1B, and there's particularly relevant to the healthcare labor shortages because it's a little bit more of a specialty visa, a visa that requires a bit more education. The issue with the H-1B visas is not necessarily things that are already wrong with the current system, but rather potential issues, potential barriers that we're seeing being erected or lawmakers trying to erect. Especially between 2015 and 2020, there's been a lot of attempted pieces of legislation to put barriers up against H-1B visas, and that comes in a lot of different shapes. That can come in the form of establishing a wall between foreign students and then their first employment in the United States, or a certain threshold for salary expectations that H-1B grantees can have, as well as the amount of experience that they already have in their career. Some pieces of legislation have named 10 years before they can actually receive an H-1B visa. And our take here is that if you want to solve critical labor shortages in the United States, again, especially in the healthcare sector, which is particularly relevant for H-1B, trying to erect these kinds of barriers is going to be counterproductive because you're going to make the labor market that much less attractive to potential foreign talent. That was about all the policy recommendations that we had, but we're looking forward to a discussion with Bill.
Wonderful.
Well, let's spend a few minutes now talking about it, and those of you that have questions online, now is a good time to start thinking about them. Let's go back initially to the demographic issue. Jason, can you talk a little bit more about the link between demographics and labor shortages? And in particular, we've already made the point the United States is not the only one, that most developed countries are going through the same problem. We're not as far along down the downturn as the Koreans or the Japanese, which have experienced this for decades, really, or the Germans or the Italians, which are not in our graph, but are also facing declines. And the most interesting one actually is China, where I think we're talking about a dramatic decline over the next 60, 75 years. By 2100, various estimates have them around 700 million people, which is like half of their existing population. So they're faced with the same problem, an aging problem. Do we have any ideas about what other countries are doing to tackle this problem?
This is a great set of questions, Bill. I think the biggest challenge, you see it obviously for countries like Korea and Japan that don't have a lot of immigration, that's what's weighing on their birth rates and their fertility rates more than ours, because we do have a large, healthy immigrant population coming into the U.S. The U.S. is actually expected to see its population exceed 400 million at the end of the century. So it's wild to think that there could be 300 million or less spread between the population of the U.S. and the population of China at the end of the century. And we've all heard this.
Well, they're going to go from 4 times our size to half our size. Twice our size.
Right. Right. And so, I think we've all heard many times demographics is destiny or something, some permutation of this. And, how do you tackle it? Honestly, the truth is that as economies moved from agrarian to industrial and some leapfrogged and went from agrarian to knowledge economies, birth rates fell very, very quickly as you saw rapid urbanization and then the rapid increase of cost, where children went from being an asset and potentially a very quickly income producing asset to being a cost and a liability. And then this is what happened, especially rapid industrialization and knowledge economy. This is why the fertility rates in Korea fell so drastically. They're the most drastic decline on that graph. China, the one-child policy had an impact, but that rapid urbanization and move to a knowledge economy, all of that has had an impact. I don't know if there's really a reversal for that, because even the birth rates in the countries with the highest birth rates, Pakistan, Nigeria, all their birth rates are also falling. I think you'd be hard-pressed to find a single country in the world where the birth rate's going up. So how do we tackle it? I just think some sound policies around immigration and thinking about how the workforce and potential immigrants in a legal structure can help to support our economic ends to make sure we're getting folks to come to the U.S. who can help add value to the economy and benefit our society, filling those critical gaps for us.
Yeah, I think one of the points that's come out in this is there are not a lot of options here. And if you think about it, this is not a short-term problem, it's a long-term problem. All the workers in this country in 2040 have been born already. We can't in 2038 we can't create more 18-year-olds. We know what the 2040 population is going to look like. It'll probably be smaller than we can forecast, because if there's another pandemic or if other things happen, other bad things happen, the population will be reduced. But we can take a look at 15 and just about 15 years out and predict with some certainty what our population is going to look like. Those people have already been born. Efforts in other countries to increase population through incentives. We'll give you money if you have another baby, or we'll give you free college, or whatever, a variety of incentives. A number of countries have tried that over the years. The French have done it for a long time, on and off. It's not really had spectacular results, would be the best way to put it. Japan is taking a completely different approach, as you said, Jason. It's not an immigration country historically. They're really leading the world in the use of robots. And not only industrial robots, but actually robots as healthcare workers, robots, taking medication around in hospitals. Different approach.
And there's some things robots can do and some they can't, right? Some of the, and
Right.
especially as we think about the aging workforce, you know, I mean, people often say, well, robots are the answer. Well, they can be for entertainment, drug dispensing, other stuff like that. But, you know, they're not going to physically care for them. I mean, if you wouldn't let a robot bathe your cat or dog, I know I certainly wouldn't, are you going to let them do that to an elder patient in a facility? Well, no, right? Like, this is what manufacturers call an inverted delta part, which means if it doesn't work right, really bad things happen and people could die. So this is like a really, really risky thing because older folks are fragile. And like, this is like the reality of the world in which we live, right? And, you know, I think, touching on that and thinking about these demographic issues, we look at the labor force participation rates. Like you said, everybody's already been born. And there is this perception out there that the younger people aren't participating in the labor force. You look at the data, 16 to 19-year-olds are participating now in the highest levels in over 15 years since the Great Recession or before. And that actually went up after COVID, even though people think that all the young people, you know, they're not participating in the workforce, they're at home making Instagram videos, becoming dog influencers with their pet or whatever. That's actually not what's happening. The 16 to 19-year-olds are showing up, and of course wages have gone up. Since January 2020, they've gone up over $7 an hour, which is a lot. And it's really the folks who are over 55 who left the workforce after COVID. They have not come back. They're not coming back. And they're certainly not coming back to construction, healthcare, transport, these physically demanding agriculture, these physically demanding in-person roles. The folks, you look at labor force participation rates, over 55 and over 65, those are the folks who didn't come back. Those are not going to be industries they're probably looking to come back to, even if they were to re-enter the labor.
Well, take that a step farther. How many American kids, 16 and 19, want to be farmers or construction workers?
This is very tough.
Or healthcare personal assistant workers?
I mean, I think the number one tool that we've seen being used by countries is just raising the retirement age incrementally, right? And that's the heart of this problem here, is that ratio of working people to retirees is becoming increasingly severe. As in, you have more retirees and the welfare state is put under an increasing amount of stress. We've seen France do that, for raising the age from 62 to 64. There was an enormous amount of backlash. Now, the French may be a particular case, but I think that's going to be you're going to see that kind of backlash in other countries as well. And it's a little bit like the immigration conversation, where what's politically feasible is at odds with what you should actually be doing in order to solve the crisis, right? We should see these retirement ages probably increase much more than we are, but that's not a popular option.
Well, and it's funny you mentioned this, Thibault, because if you look back at historical U.S. data, when we first had things that looked like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid in the United States, the age at which, or the ratio of the workers to recipient, I think it was close to 160 workers per recipient, and now we're pretty close to 2 workers per recipient. And if you go to the Social Security Administration website, you can see the picture of the grandfather of Social Security. I'm not exaggerating this. It's Otto von Bismarck, which not a paragon of democracy. He's wearing a pickelhaube and everything, right? A metal hat and the whole thing. Because in the 1880s there was a rising socialist party in Germany agitating for something that looked like Social Security. And, Otto, the iron and blood chancellor, not the butterflies and rainbows chancellor, implemented this, pushed for it from above, and the average age at which you received benefits was 70. This was 1880s Germany. The life expectancy in 1880s Germany was 40. Those numbers work because you don't get the benefits until 30 years beyond life expectancy, right? So, but now we have a situation where life expectancy, which we also, obviously that's another issue, right? Like life expectancy is going up and population's aging, and so we're paying out benefits for longer with higher medical costs, and we have fewer workers per recipient. I mean, this probably has to be part of the solution, scaling up at what age you receive benefits. This is going to be a challenge because these systems are at risk of insolvency. Social Security, I think, 2034.
Well, exactly. What you get is a growing inverted pyramid where you have fewer and fewer workers paying into a program that is supporting more and more retirees.
That's right.
And we've run into this problem in the past with specific companies. in specific industries that have gone through this problem earlier, with significant job, with steel industry being a good example, significant job reductions for a lot of reasons, a lot of it technological improvement, and in their case also imports, but significant job reductions, which produces then a huge number of retirees and a small group of workers paying into the pension plan, which creates a crisis, and eventually the company may reach the point where it can't afford to meet its obligations, which is where the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation steps in. But if you multiply that by, thousands of companies and lots of people, you're going to have a major problem. Let's pursue that for just a minute, and then I want to turn to the security issue. Project a little bit, Jason, out to the longer term about what does the situation that we're talking about mean for the U.S. economy longer term, and are there any particular sectors in addition to the ones that we talked about that are going to be most affected?
Yeah, I think that this is really great. I think the focus of the paper, it was so great to work with you, with both you and Thibault on this, the focus on what is the real economic tangibles. Folks are talking about immigration in so many different ways. We touch on a lot of the critical industries, and because they not only, if we don't have enough people in construction, there's huge inflationary impact. Medical, there's an inflationary impact, but then there's also a lifestyle impact as we see the number of retirees grow. Like, how do we take care of these folks? Transportation and logistics becoming more important. How do we get around? Agriculture, critical. Anything that's physically demanding and in person, there is no substitute, right? Like right now, of course, I'm sure you've seen it, and Thibault, the buzz around AI and what AI can do. AI is not going to change bedpans. AI is not going to dig ditches. AI is not going to, right? There's some things it can do, but not a lot of the physically demanding in-person stuff that needs to be done. And you can use equipment, and that's true. There are automated solutions in agriculture. There's automated solutions in construction. There are automated things being implemented in healthcare, but there's still a lot of stuff that has to be physically done in person. And we're not there. And of course, with self-driving trucks, we're not there yet either, right? So we have a truck driver shortage, and you can tell anyone in the physical economy moving stuff around, they'll tell you these are challenges. So taking a look at the long run, I think we need to be sure that we have enough people doing these physically demanding in-person roles. We have pathways to getting people into these roles. And I think about the fact, look, I live in Austin, Texas. It's a tech city. If I wanted to hire a tech engineer, I could post a job posting. Maybe within an hour, I might have 10 people at my office looking for that job. If I have a plumbing problem, getting a plumber to my house, like I need a summoning circle, an incantation, magic candles, and then I'm going to have to pitch them like in Shark Tank to get them to, do something innocuous like fix a toilet for $500. There aren't enough people in the trades either, right? That's another area. And I tell you, I know folks are optimistic about what we can do with 3D printing buildings. I tell you, before there are robots that change plumbing, I'll be calling up someone to tear down my house and reprint it before robots can fix plumbing. Because why? It's highly customized. Plumbing is different in every structure, in every building. We don't kit out our houses. So, electrical, HVAC, all of those things. We need more people in those areas as well. So there's it's important to consider that as our economy, we want high levels of education and attainment. We want a knowledge economy, that's the way we grow. But we also want to make sure we have enough people doing the physically demanding in-person work so that the economy can go, because we don't live in the metaverse, right? And this is an important part of it.
Yeah, I think it's the main takeaway for policymakers here is that we're really looking at very critical aspects of American life, right? That's why we discuss not necessarily looking at STEMs, because these blue-collar worker shortages just really hit at Americans' ability to get affordable groceries, affordable medical care, affordable housing, and that's so what you're talking about, right? So robots aren't going to be able to do that anytime soon, and unless we are able to solve these worker shortages, the crises are going to become increasingly acute.
So take that a step further and take a look at something that the paper also addresses that we have not talked about very much, which is the new fashionable term economic security, which has become conflated with national security, and we don't have time in this particular episode to get into the distinctions, but how does the worker shortage that we're talking about affect our economic security? Thibault?
Well, I mean, a key point of U.S. economic security, or economic security around the world for that matter, is strengthening supply chains. And that's another debate that we don't want to get into right now, but there's the idea of friendshoring versus reshoring, right? When you strengthen your supply chains, where do you turn to allies and partners? And where do you turn to yourself to increase your own production capabilities? And the United States has undertaken significant policy packages like the IIJA, the Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS and Science Act, in order to scale up our production capabilities in what we call national security critical supply chains, right? Like semiconductors, for example. The issue with these very ambitious subsidy packages is that they artificially create positions that aren't necessarily going to be filled, right? The IIJA, for example, the Infrastructure Act, is going to open 300,000 construction jobs a year in the late 20s. Those jobs are not necessarily going to be filled, as we just saw. So in order for the United States to strengthen its economic security, to achieve these packages' goals, it's important for the U.S. to actually have the workers to fill these positions. That's an aspect of U.S. economic security that we haven't looked at yet, is how do we actually promote it. As we say, we've taken a lot of attention to the protection side of economic security. The promotion side really requires workers that we just don't have now.
Yeah, we've seen that in some high-tech areas as well, haven't we, with fabs being delayed because of potential worker shortages?
Right, exactly. That's something that happened in Arizona with, I think, TSMC's investments. The number one issue was actual workforce shortages, and we had to import some workers from Taiwan in order to get the project started.
So what's the, it's tempting to say the main takeaway for policymakers is do something, but can we be a little bit more specific? Can we be a little more specific on visa solutions in particular?
Right, exactly. I mean, aside from the policy recommendations that we just offered, there's a number of ways in which we could approach the problem. The way that I like personally, sort of linking U.S. economic security to the critical labor shortages that we have, is creating this strategic sectors visa, which instead of either looking at a very specific sector like agriculture or having an extremely high experience thresholds like H-1Bs or other specialized experience visas, it would be experience blind and would try to address worker shortages on all of these economic security critical sectors. So healthcare is one of them, semiconductors, manufacturing is another one, transportation is another one. We've already tried to do that, and that's something that the White House has currently looked at, right? With the latest AI memorandum that was released about 3 months ago, a key part of that was solving our workforce shortage issues much earlier in the United States, in around the 1920s. We tried to solve our agriculture labor shortage issues with the Braceros programs. Both of those were very tailored to crises at the moment, but we have a much more systematic need right now, right, across a number of sectors. So my idea personally would be to set up that strategic sectors program that could be much more ambitious about the ways in which it can open pathways for foreign workers to come in the United States.
I'd love to jump in on one of the...
Yeah, jump in.
Please.
Well, I want you to jump in, but first let me remind our listeners, now is a good time to submit questions, and now is a good time for Thibault to look at his phone to see if there are any, while Jason is jumping in.
No, thank you, Bill. I think this is great, and I think the economic security points that Thibault pointed out are really great. I would add one to that, which is if we look at what's another sector that has had difficulty filling roles that are physically demanding and in person, it's the Department of Defense. And for years now, there have been shortfalls in Army and Navy recruiting. The Army hit their target this year. They lowered the target, which made it easier to hit. They also reduced restrictions on recruiting, but physically demanding in-person roles, again, this is also something that they need to fill. And if we look at the National Defense Authorization Act for 2025, it raises the selective service draft age from 18 to 24 to 18 to 26, and it makes registration automatic first time. So that's not a coincidence that in a super tight labor market where we're having trouble recruiting for physically demanding in-person roles, that the DoD is struggling to fill physically demanding in-person roles. And that now they're, obviously we don't have a draft right now, but they're already raising the age for what that would involve, which means the risks of things like involuntary reserve recall, something that would happen long before we have a draft. becomes a higher probability event if the DoD can't fill its roles for physically demanding in-person roles. And so making sure we have enough people doing these roles, finding paths to get folks to fill some of these critical things adds a bigger labor pool in the economy of people who might do physically demanding in-person roles, which would allow for certain fungibility within the labor market that hopefully would also allow the DoD to have an easier time recruiting.
Of course, you also see the military moving in the direction of basically unmanned weaponry and unmanned warfare, I think primarily to save lives, but it also has the effect of reducing manpower needs, don't you think? Or not?
So the tooth-to-tail ratio has improved, and there are automated things, but if you look at the Green Navy, Blue Navy numbers, I think there's only like 24 of sailors on base for 100 at sea. You want a much higher number of folks who are Green Navy on base so that the Blue Navy, when they come in, you can switch out folks. So you do need more folks in the Navy. And the Army infantry, you need more folks in infantry. And of course, we see what's going on in Europe with the Russian war in Ukraine. We see other conflicts in the world. Our adversaries know we have been having shortfalls in our DoD recruiting, right? We're very open with our numbers. Folks know this. So there are areas where we're using a lot more technology. But, if you're in an infantry situation, that's not really, there's some areas that are substitutable, but you still need to have more folks, more people listening.
So any questions?
Yeah, we have quite a few questions actually.
goodness.
So let me
Go ahead.
Let me get started. The first one I'm seeing here, which is ultimately, could we have a shift of agriculture and manufacturing production to developing countries with abundant labor force? So I guess this question could be taken as either should we have that shift or can we have that shift? And I encourage the two of you to look at that.
Could you repeat it one more time?
Sure. Could we have a shift of agriculture and manufacturing production to developing countries with a more abundant labor force than the United States?
I mean, we're trying to rebuild our industrial base. I mean, that was started in the first Trump administration. It was continued in the Biden administration, which has been, in a meeting I had at the White House last month, they were very quick to point out that we have the strongest industrial base since the Vietnam War. It's not a coincidence that we look around and the risks Cold War II presents, and we see the importance of having an industrial base. So outsourcing more manufacturing is certainly not something the U.S. is looking to do. They're looking to do, as you pointed out, friend-shoring or reshoring. We want to build more industrial base. Again, we did it in Trump 1. We did it under Biden. We're going to do it under Trump 2. That's going to continue. As for agriculture, we're a net exporter of ag. Why
Not anymore. Not anymore. That's the interesting thing. We are now in our fourth year of growing agriculture deficits. In part, a lot of it is in response to tariffs and the farmers are always the primary victims of retaliation. So we imposed tariffs on industrial products, as Trump did, and the Chinese response was to start buying soybeans from Brazil. And we never really fully recovered from that, and it's probably going to happen again. But I think that Jason's exactly right. I mean, the government policy has been to build up that sector and try to help the farm sector, the agriculture sector, export more and grow more. So I don't think we're going to move in that direction.
I agree, and I think there's a difference between what the government is saying is going to happen, what policies we're enacting, and what we're actually going to happen, which could be the sense of that question. I mean, yes, we're trying to de-risk our manufacturing, agricultural dependencies away from certain countries of concern, right?
Yeah.
But we are going to see a rise of third countries in importance, especially in the manufacturing sector, right? Thinking about Southeast Asia, for example, right? Vietnam, the Philippines, who also have an abundant labor force. They have their own India. They have their own infrastructure issues that need to be solved. That being said, we're probably going to see a shift from these countries of concern, especially in manufacturing, to these third countries. It's not all going to come back to the United States. In part given our labor issues, right? So it's not going to be reshoring entirely.
Got another one?
Yes. Well, for example, we're talking about India. India is currently the most populated country. Are we expecting to see population decline at the same rates as China or the United States? And what might that mean for the broader global economy?
No, Indian population hasn't peaked yet. It's expected to continue rising. The rate at which it rises is expected to slow, but it's expected to continue rising. Yeah.
Great. So, is it possible to address the issue that we're discussing by establishing other types of visas specifically for the sectors that are facing shortages? Well, that was
you want to
clearly
answer
one of
that
our
one?
policy recommendations, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, as always with the immigration policy conversation, there's a difference between what we ought to be doing and what's politically feasible, right? Especially at a time when we're also talking about the protective immigration measures, right? I think Trump 2016 campaign was built on a premise of building a wall between the United States and Mexico. Again, we're seeing some of these protective measures being called on. And there has been some space for more openness to legal pathways to immigration. We should certainly be encouraging those. The idea of a strategic sectors visa is probably the ideal version of that. If we fall short, right, we could also look at what specific sectors really need more help. And there, I think agriculture is the number one target, partially because we already have this H-2A system that's already well in place. And although, again, USCIS does face some staffing and processing issues, if we're able to give them additional funding, we'd probably see better outcomes for the agricultural sector. That's particularly important because, again, we're trying to solve the grocery prices issue around the United States.
Along those lines, another sector that could be really important, especially tying back to that industrial-based question prior, is the fact right now there's between 400 and 500,000 open manufacturing jobs right now, which is also a really big number. And if we're going to try to build our industrial base more, we may also need to consider, and with manufacturing, you can have quite a bit of robots in manufacturing, especially if you're building greenfield facilities that have never existed, because sometimes otherwise you might have pushback from labor. But if you're bringing in a greenfield, you're also still probably going to need more people in manufacturing. And that also could be economic security and all these other things. And that may also be a sector that might be eligible, although again, I would put it below, as you did, below agriculture, healthcare, construction. Those are probably the top three. Yeah.
So I think we have time for one more.
Yeah, we're in penalty time, but let's just address this one, which is how do you expect Congress to view these findings, our findings, and what reforms do you expect the 119th Congress to propose, given what we've looked at here?
I'm happy to take this one. Look, I've had a number of conversations in this last congressional session with folks in both parties about bipartisan immigration reform. There is appetite to get that done. What that looks like in the details is kind of the question, especially under a second Trump administration. How will that all fit together? I don't know, but I know there is a growing recognition that this needs to be done, and that pairing it with border security and more legal paths to access immigration in a way that helps strengthen the U.S. economy and our economic security. There is bipartisan support for that. I think we are going to see progress. I don't know if we're going to get there with legislation in full reform. I hope we do, but there is definitely bipartisan support at this point.
Yeah, we nearly saw that kind of effort. I think last year and then the 2024 campaign race sort of meddled with that, but we're very close to seeing a bipartisan bill get through the Senate, right? Yeah. We can see that kind of effort again in the 119th Congress.
Well, that creates the opportunity for a closing plug. This is part one of our efforts to focus on immigration policy at CSIS. Part two will be a session that we're planning for early next year, which means a few weeks from now, hopefully in January, either shortly before or shortly after the inauguration, where we'll have some members of Congress as guests and ask them that exact same question. What are their plans and what do they see happening, on the assumption that since they're up there, they're in a better position to answer it than we are. And so this is going to be, this will be a continuing effort that I think CSIS will focus on. The Scholl Chair is doing this because of the economic importance of the issue. This has got long-term implications for our economy. It's not just a problem for this week or this month, it's a problem going forward. And it's something that Congress badly needs to deal with, and we'll keep urging them to take action. We'll have some policy suggestions of our own. Thibault's outlined some of those, but mostly we want to get the debate started so that we can start getting something actually happening. So with that, thank you to both Jason and Thibault, and to our audience, thank you for watching, and we hope you'll come back and join us again for the second part of this next year. Thank you.